What up, YouTube? It's February the 12th, and it's about 10:25 right now. This is basically me just picking up where I left off at last time. But again, this is just like the little study process. You know, not doing nobody's homework, but just kind of like documenting where I'm at. Of course, this is a build up to Nestorius and the book that I copied down and his arguments about Jesus. But I wanted to know a little bit more about the background as far as the apostolic period, but more so in the 4th century, because that's the same century that Nestorius was born at. I already know about Arius and Arianism, but I wanted to get a little bit more context about that. So like in the other practice blogs that I did about this subject, you know, I mentioned other councils, and I was talking about, like, I was trying to understand, like, exactly what was going on, because you had this big conflict between the people that believed in the Trinitarian doctrine and then those that believed in Arianism. And then in reading more in depth about it, I found out that not only was it pervasive, but it went on for quite a long time. And even within the, I guess you could say, like, under the umbrella of Arianism, you had other or different facets of it. So it's, you know, it's hard to pinpoint exactly where I want to start off at, but I'm gonna start off with this guy Eusebius, not Eusebius of Nicomedia, but Eusebius of Caesarea Maritima. All right, now he was born in the late 3rd century. 260 AD to be exact, but he also stands on the shoulders of people that came before him, because the interpretation of Jesus from his point of view was that Jesus existed and Jesus was real, but Jesus also existed eternally with God, like he wasn't begetted. So that was a difference between his view, which was also shared by a whole bunch of other people that I'm going to highlight in 1 second. But that was the difference between his view and where Arius was coming from. Because during this period, Arius was a contemporary of him. Because Eusebius became a bishop of Caesarea Maritima in 314, 2 years after his after the former bishop died, the guy that kind of, like, you know, brought him under his arm and also taught him additional teachings about this particular subject. His name is Pamphilus. Pamphilus. I might not be saying it right, but that's how it reads to me. Pamphilus. All right, this guy Pamphilus was the bishop from 301 to 312, I want to say. All right. But the guy that came before him, who was kind of like a forefather of both of them, and also a forefather of the people within Caesarea Maritima that converted to that interpretation. His name is Origen. Now, Origen was born in the late 2nd century, 185 AD to be exact. He was somebody that was supposed to have been really learned and broad in his range, and that he collected Christian writings relating to both the Old Testament and the New Testament. But they also mentioned how, you know, he studied Plato's philosophy as well, and other, you know, philosophical beliefs, but those are the main ones that I remember off top that he studied. And again, he was like the originator from this particular region. I don't want to say region, but like that city, Caesarea Maritima, which is also located in Palestine. It's supposed to border, or it did border, the Mediterranean Sea, but it's west of the northern West Bank. All right. So anyway, Pamphilus, even though he did study this guy Origen's teachings, because all the writings that he collected, you know, he built like a whole fucking library basically. Even though he studied his teachers, he didn't come directly after him. There was another guy in between by the name of Theotechnos. All right. So anyway, by the time Eusebius came into being, you know, he had access to these teachers. The only thing is, as far as Eusebius, I'm trying to make sure if Eusebius or not Pamphilus. One of the two was born in Alexandria. I'm gonna say Pamphilus was born in Alexandria. And somehow, yeah, Pamphilus, I'm going to say him. He was born in Alexandria. Somehow he came across these teachings and, you know, he started studying them thoroughly. Again, he had access to the library or the collection of writings that Origen gathered in his lifetime. So by the time Eusebius came into being, he studied the same fucking thing. Again, as far as Jesus, they believe that he existed eternally with God, so he was never begetted. In other words, he's not secondary to God. That's where they was coming from. But during this whole little time period, like I say, from Sirmium to Serdica to fucking Italy to Alexandria, you know, you had these two warring factions as far as these belief systems regarding Jesus at play. Arianism and Trinitarianism. Now, as far as like Arianism, it's like a different facet of it. Before I go into it, I just want to say like the radical version of it, they call it like conservative Arianism. I personally believe that that's an interpretation that Arius held from the get-go. Let me say that. Let me break that down before I go further. That particular interpretation is like God and Jesus are real, but Jesus is not of the same substance of God to the point where he is basically a fucking human being. That's basically how I took it, my understanding of it. So anyway, Athanasius, the guy that I mentioned in like my earlier blogs, who's labeled as the church father overall of this whole entire period, not just a doctor, but like the most prominent figure, so-called, you know, he came from Alexandria, all right? Him in particular, he was a deacon before he became a bishop. And the bishop that he studied under was a guy named Alexander. All right, Alexander participated at the Nicene Council. So did Athanasius, but Athanasius, like I said, he was not a bishop at the time, he was a deacon. So that's in 325. The interesting thing is, only like 3 years after the fact, that's when Athanasius became a bishop of Alexandria in Egypt. But an archbishop, not just a bishop, an archbishop. But as far as Pamphilus, that's where he come from originally as well. Now, even before this whole look, this is going back to, this is like the context as far as like the fighting between these warring factions. Even though like somebody like Eusebius wasn't considered like the radical form of Arianism, he was considered like one of those semi-Arians. These like the fucking terms that they use, but like the real technical terms is homoousios, which represents the Trinitarian doctrine, homoousios, or homoousios, which represents the semi-Arian form or interpretation of Jesus, going back to Eusebius again. And then you had the more radical, so-called strict form of Arianism, which I believe that Arius was beholding to the whole fucking time. And that is the anomo-eos, or anomo-eon. But I like to say eos. All right, again, that's just basically saying that Jesus and God is completely different, to the point where Jesus was basically a fucking human being. Now, what validated, because I had said this already in the blog, but what validated that to me is when I was reading about Eusebius. And reading about him, I came across this, this mention of a letter that Arius had written, but he wrote it to Eusebius of Nicomedia, which is in Antioch, Turkey today. And within his letter, he had criticisms of some of the teachings of Origen. Remember, that's like the semi-Arian, right? And then one of his major criticisms that validated that I was correct the whole fucking time about Arius and not Atheist being the originator of the so-called conservative form of Arianism is that within his fucking letter, his critique, one of his critiques was that he felt like Origen's form or belief system almost seems like it kind of mirrored paganistic thought in a sense, as far as like the whole Trinitarian system. All right, so I thought that was interesting. I was like, okay, that's correct. The reason why I thought that was interesting and factual and validated what the fuck I think is because Arius got excommunicated in 325 during that whole little council or whatever, because he wouldn't have signed the creed, even though Eusebius of Nicomedia, I believe, did. Also, Eusebius of Caesarea Maritima was there as well. But he got excommunicated. But later on, Constantine the Great told him that he could, like, he'll be able to recommune if he kind of like filter out some of the more radical forms of his interpretation, thus accepting the semi-Arian form. All right, and the reason why I say that is a semi-Arian form, as far as the Homo Ouiousios, is because of what happened in Italy. This guy named Eustathius as well, who was the Archbishop of Antioch. I'll touch on that in a second. But the logic to me, as far as him accepting or filtering out the quote-unquote radical forms of his belief system, basically that strict, rigid interpretation of Jesus, and him taking like a lesser form, validates to me that this whole little term, as far as conservative Arianism, is something that he started in the first place, even though it wasn't given that term. Now, the other term that I mentioned that also qualifies that school of thought, as far as anomos, was attributed to another guy named Atheist, who came later on. Now, Atheist, he's somebody that I mentioned when I did my whole blog about Najran and the debate that he had with somebody else, and he beat the guy so bad he ended up killing him, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, Atheist, and then another guy, I can't call that guy's name offhand because I wanted to do a little bit more research about him. But Atheist and this other guy, whose name starts with H, they are given credit for this whole view of conservative Arianism. But again, I believe personally that they just basically, picked off where Arius picked up on where, or like basically continued the view, the system of thought that Arius held to be true during his lifetime. That's what I believe. And again, this whole little thing about that little letter that he wrote to Eusebius of Nicomedia, basically explaining the difference between where he was coming from and Origen, who lived way before him. Again, that's the guy that basically died during like the early 3rd century, first half of the 3rd century. That's the guy that I said was born in 185 AD. He basically differentiated the difference between his belief system and that guy's belief system. The difference was the time, the timeless so-called of Jesus. He didn't believe, as far as Arius, he didn't believe that Jesus coexisted with God eternally. In other words, he didn't believe that Jesus didn't have a beginning. All right, he made that clear. Now, people that's considered like semi-Arians do believe that he have a beginning. See what I'm saying? They just don't believe that Jesus and God are of the same exact substance. That's the difference. See, the wording's a little different, and a little difficult to explain. I'll touch on that before I cut this recording off. So that's my personal belief system as far as areas. Now, going back to Eusebius, the Archbishop of Antioch, Eustathius, had an issue with their interpretation, semi-Arianism, because he felt like a lot of people in Antioch was being influenced into that as well. Again, this goes back to like the whole understanding about this whole little fight being so fucking pervasive to the point where it's ubiquitous, because it's not only in the eastern prefectures, it was also in the western ones as well. And Antioch is pretty far from fucking Palestine. You know what I'm saying? It's north of it, but it's not close. And this is the Archbishop of Antioch. So he basically had him punished. Now, on these little the Wikipedia articles I read about this, they didn't really get too detailed as far as exactly what happened, other than Bishop Eustathius feeling a certain type of way about this guy having some influence. But he basically had him deposed, kicked off his post as bishop. But based on the Nicene canons that I did copy down, it's like 25 of them. It was one law, one canon, which is canon 5. And it read basically like, okay, if something happens to where a bishop gets ousted from his post, he does have the right to, you know, ask for like a fair trial or some type of review or something like that. So that's exactly what happened. So it was like a little synod that occurred to where, and this is in 330, by the way, 330 AD. It was a synod that, hold on, let me light my other cigarette. So it's a little synod that occurred to where Constantine the Great basically found no wrong in whatever that Bishop Eustathius accused Eusebius of doing. Whatever it was, like I said, they didn't get too detailed. But another interesting thing to me that came off as a hint is that not only did Constantine find no wrongdoing on the behalf of Eusebius, but he also took this Archbishop Eustathius off his post. Now remember, this is the Archbishop of Antioch, all right? For him to be voted off or taken off his post is a big deal. That means it was some type of fucking influence from other, well, I ain't gonna say influence, but basically like this whole view of Arianism, again, not the strict version, but the semi form of it, did have some leeway. That means enough people adhere to that to where it has some type of political effect to where this guy Eusebius, who was popular where he was from, could get taken off his post by this archbishop, but at the same time that resulting in the emperor taking that archbishop off his post. That reflects a whole political, I don't want to say context, but that's basically what it was. Some type of political context in the region that went on to where the emperor found it more than likely favorable to take this guy off his post. And this is the Archbishop of Antioch again. That's interesting. Now going to a whole nother little situation or event that happened that I found to be significant as well, because it's similar to that, is Athanasius. Remember, Athanasius, like I said, later on, even though after his life he got venerated, he was a really popular dude, all right? Athanasius got, well, before this whole little council, as far as the one that occurred in 325, the Council of Nicaea, like I said before, it was like a lot of fighting and rioting and shit like that going on because of these two main factions of thought. That's the whole purpose, or one of the main purpose for that council. Anyway, that basically upheld the whole little perspective of the Trinitarian doctrine. All right. So Athanasius, 3 years after that whole little council, became an archbishop of Alexandria. Now, it was another council that was supposed to have occurred around 334. He didn't attend that one. So another one was called upon by the emperor, Constantine. That one occurred in 336. Now, right before that, Athanasius had issues in Egypt as well. He was accused of murder. He was accused of fucking usurpery, basically like an excessive tax, and also threatening not to send or like to block the trade as far as like grain and stuff like that going to Constantinople and Antioch. He was accused of that. So Constantine the Great put in an order that he show up at this next fucking council meeting or he'll be forced to show up. And it was supposed to have taken place in Jerusalem at the time. Now this 336. But he also said that, or ordered that they meet in front of him in Antioch. I'm talking about the emperor. That Athanasius and all of these other bishops meet in front of him so he can face these charges. Now that part that I read was a little confusing because I was trying to figure out which one is first. Like, did he actually go to Jerusalem first and then end up with the emperor, or meet with the emperor, or was it vice versa? But the whole thing, he was supposed to answer to these charges, and the result of it is that he was found guilty based on the fact of these threats of him trying to block this whole trade, or threatening to block the trade as far as grains to Constantinople at the time. So he was taken off his post and excommunicated and exiled from Alexandria as a result of that. That was the orders of the emperor. Now, the reason why I thought that was significant, because it also kind of mirrors the whole situation with Bishop Eustathius at the same time. Now, I'm looking at it like, okay, if you got all of these people in Egypt, or Alexandria really, and you had like a sufficient amount of people that adhere to the Trinitarian doctrine, and you got this archbishop who's supposed to have had some popularity at this time, for Constantine to take him off his post based on these threats. Again, this is not Antioch, this is Egypt. Based off these threats, it also, to me, reflects like a political situation on the ground as well. May not necessarily be between like the hardcore conservative areas, because that was supposed to have been outlawed at the time. In fact, you know, after the little council in 325, all the Arius' writings and all that type of shit, it was proclaimed by the emperor to have all that shit burnt, and anybody found trying to savor or hold on to any copies, you know, the punishment was capital death at the time. All right, now going back to the semi-Arian interpretation, all right, which I feel like, you know, again, it's kind of like a way to kind of like circumvent church law at the same time. For this guy to be taken off his fucking post and he's the archbishop shows to me that this whole little Arian view definitely had some influence at the time, and for him to also be exiled was a big deal. And this is in 336. Now, why do I say that, and why do I feel like that's true? Because in that same fucking year, that's when the emperor allowed Arius to recommune again. 336. At that, you know, during this whole little period with the council, along with his decision to have Athanasius taken off his post, an additional proclamation was to reinstate Arius as far as him being allowed to recommune. That was fucking significant, and I found that to be interesting. So Athanasius had ended up going all the way to Gaul. All right, so Gaul is not just Germany, but it was a city called Trier that he had went to. Even though like later on, it's like in one of my earlier blogs, I was saying like in 343 at the Council of Serdica, you know, he tried to participate and he was blocked from participating. But like the guy that hosted this whole little council, or presided over it, Hosius of Cordoba, the same guy that also presided over the Council of Nicene. You know, he allowed Athanasius to go ahead and participate in that particular council. Again, that's reflecting some political shit going on at the same time, because Hosius was not an Arian, he was not a semi-Arian. He was somebody that also adhered to the Trinitarian doctrine at the same time. So again, anyway, so Athanasius got exiled, and he had to go, he went all the way to Germany, to Trier in Germany. That was also telling. Now, another situation that happened, this is like, it's a little bit, it's basically after this. It's another guy. Now, he was the last person that I read about. His name was Hilary, and he was also a bishop. Now, Hilary, he was born in like 310, right? And he was born in France, a place called Poitiers. And it might not be the correct way to say it, because it's Poitiers. So it could be Poitiers, I don't know, but I'm going to say Poitiers. Bishop of Poitiers. He became a bishop in 350. It's a little discrepancy as far as the dates. Some people say 353. I'm going to say 350, and I got my reasons for that. But, you know, again, based on what I read as far as him, you know, he had some concerns about this whole Arianism. And again, I'm going to say the semi-Arian version. This whole little view of, and that's based off church law, but this whole little view of Arianism spreading throughout the West, because even though you had people in the West that believed in it, it was more popular in the East at the time. I'll say why that's the case in a second. So anyway, he became a bishop, and it was like 3 people that he had taken off their post. It was a guy named Valens, and he was the bishop of Mers. I didn't get the exact date with him, but Mers, that was supposed to be in Croatia. Again, that's Central Europe. Now that's interesting, because I'm not sure if that's like the prefecture of Ilirum or the prefecture of Italy, because like in one of my earlier blogs, I was saying like some of those surrounding countries today, you know, all those countries that kind of like encompassed what Ilirum was. You know, within some of these surrounding countries, you had territory that also belonged to the prefecture of Italy at the time. So I'm not sure, if, you know, I'm not sure if like Mers, for example, was like considered a part of Italy or Ilirum. But anyway, probably more than likely Italy, because that's like the western side of it. So anyway, he had that guy taking off his post. He had another guy named Eusebius, and he came from a place. He was the bishop of a place called Sigi Dunham, and I think that was in. That could have been. I think that could have been in Italy also. Then there was another bishop. I can't remember his name off top.